Hi, everybody. So, we're going to cover technology use in the classroom and outside of the classroom. We're going to talk about some considerations in terms of just technology in general. We're going to talk about some considerations for like financial concerns and spending money on technology. And we're going to also get into some different types of tech. One important thing I want to mention here is that even if you're not planning or envisioning yourself in a traditional teaching setting, you can absolutely still use this information and the skills that you gain from this for research or training purposes. You might find that some of the apps and software you can use for collaborations among colleagues, or if you have a research lab, you can use it with students. So I'm going to kind of touch on some of that as well. One of the biggest things that I write a lot about and I talk a lot about is about being intentional. And so technology should have a purpose. It should have an intention. You should, not be detracting from the learning experience. You should be enhancing the learning experience. And it could be that you're using technology to solve a problem. You shouldn't use technology basically for the sake of using technology. It should have a purpose. I've seen people do this before where they use technology, something fancy and flashy, just for the sake of using technology. And it definitely does not enhance the experience if you do that. Maybe you're trying to solve a problem or solve an issue, or you have maybe, this need where you're like, I need to take attendance, but I don't know how to do that. Let me figure this out. Honestly, it's usually using the absolute simplest and easiest solution. You can be really creative and use things in a clever way that's simple and free, and you don't have to use anything majorly flashy. So, for example, you can use, if you have an iPad or if you have a tablet, you can use the screen record feature and you can annotate. So here I'm just annotating on my iPad using the screen record, nothing fancy, free with the iPad, the ability to record your screen and record my voice. You can use Zoom, for example. You can use the free version of Zoom by sharing your screen, and you can have your webcam on, and your students can then see you as well as see your materials. And so, using that free version, you can be maybe not use it what it was intended for. It's not intended to record lectures. It's intended for a meeting space, but using it in a clever way can solve the problems. Another thing we talked about, enhancing the experience, using technology in moderation. So don't try too many new things at once. Try to master one thing at a time. And I always have this saying, tech is great until it isn't. Have a backup plan. I'm always for going paperless and always trying to find ways to, minimize students turning in materials. But, if it's something really important, I'll print it out. If it's something really that you are doing in class that, you need some form of technology, but you're not as proficient in it, and maybe you want to rely on a backup, have that backup there and ready. But also remembering that, students, this is all new to them. So if you're using a bunch of different kinds of technology in your classroom, you want to let them also master things as they go. One huge consideration is time. Think about the fact that every new technology you learn has a learning curve, right? Everything involves time to figure it out, time to master it, time to figure it out for your students. You want to make sure that you have some how to use it on their end, and it might look different from your end as the instructor. And time is one of those things that I think we often forget. Oh, I'll just try this new tech, but it might take you hours to figure it out. And it might end up being that it's not worth it because it doesn't work for you and your needs. If you're teaching a really large class and the technology that you're using is really only good for 30 to 40 people, then again, you might be wasting time by trying something new. So, really investigating, is this technology going to work for me? And then finally, if you're testing something in your classroom, which is fine, right? You can test one thing in your class and see, how, I might incorporate this later on. But be open with your students. Tell them, hey, this is something new. We're trying this out. Be open with the students, welcome their feedback. They may say, I hate this, I love this, and really take into consideration what they're saying, because they are going to be the ones that are going to, be using it, and students in the future are going to be like them, going to be using it. Another thing that I want to kind of talk about in terms of the generations, right? So, it doesn't matter how old you are as an instructor, you will find that your students feels like they keep getting younger and younger if you're teaching for students. If you're teaching the traditional college age students, you're going to find larger gaps in terms of your experiences. So, what may come easy to you, or you may consider convenient, may be seen very differently for your younger students, or in some cases you might have older generations taking classes with you, or maybe older trainees, and they don't see your way as being very convenient because that was not their experience, right? And so your experience is going to be different from your students, especially for those students who were going through grade school during the pandemic. They lived a different kind of experience in terms of going through, fourth, fifth, sixth grade in an online world. So what you do have to do, and it sounds really easy, but it is difficult to do, is make sure that you're changing with the times. Make sure you're kind of in touch with what your students' experiences are. You might find that some apps or some tech might be intuitive for you, but your students may not find that at all. They may find this very difficult, especially considering that a lot of the technology is more simplistic. So, for example, social media tends to be very, very easy. Just press this button and it, and it shows this thing. And so, if you're having students code, if you're having students have to go in and press a lot of different things, it might not be intuitive for them. Another really important thing to consider is that when you are giving students new technology, you really have to be comfortable enough to give them directions on how to use it from their end, and also be comfortable enough to troubleshoot with them and make sure that they understand and they're able to have some kind of backup plan as well if something isn't working for them. Now, other considerations and terminology. So I'll go through this here because I do think this is important. This is not terminology that everybody necessarily knows. So I want to make sure everybody understands. So I'm going to use this term LMS pretty much throughout the rest of this video. And LMS stands for Learning Management System. And most institutions, if not all institutions, higher ed institutions, have a learning management system that they provide for the faculty and students. And so the larger institutions have the sort of more expensive ones, for example, Blackboard, Canvas, Brightspace, D2L. There is a free version of Moodle that some, especially small like liberal arts schools, might use. But there's also a pay version of Moodle. But these are some of the more popular ones. There's definitely a bunch out there like Schoology and a ton of other ones, but these tend to be the more kind of more popular ones. Also, I want to make a mention about Canvas. So I'm going to talk about something later called Canva, and this is different from Canvas. Canvas is a learning management system, an integrated system. All of these are integrated systems that allow you to do a ton of different things. Put in files. They integrate with other technologies from like publishers and other sort of platforms. You can, especially on Blackboard, you can record a lot. You can do a live video lecture, for example, through Collaborate, and then you can actually post videos and things like that. So it's like a one-stop shop, right? And we're going to talk about other one-stop shops later. But Canva is an app that is for like almost like graphic design. You could do posters and infographics. That does have like slide decks and things like that. It's a different sort of thing. So don't get confused if I talk about. This is really where I end with Canvas. Canvas is a learning management system. Canva is an app, and we'll talk about that later. But most of the LMSs have a lot of basic integrated features. You can track, for example, views. You can track progress of students. You can see what students click on. You can see when they click on it. So if they're submitting assignments or if they're submitting something, you can actually go in and see when they were on certain pages on your class page, for example. Another terminology, many of you are probably familiar, but I just want to kind of make sure, break it down. So you can have, if you have an app or a software, if it's a subscription, then that means that you pay maybe for a year or maybe 3 years or 5 years for use. There's personal subscriptions, so you can, which tend to be more expensive, or institutional ones, which will go down in price as you have a greater package. So if you have 150 to 500 to 1,000 users, you're going to see different prices based off of a yearly subscription. And it's a subscription. So if it's a yearly thing, then that means that you only get it for the year. So some examples of apps or platforms. Canva has a yearly subscription, Padlet, Socrative. These are all apps that we'll talk about later that have yearly subscriptions and pricing based off of institutional pricing versus personal pricing. And if you find that there's a particular technology that might be a little bit more expensive and that you don't necessarily want to pay for out of pocket, you could certainly team up with other faculty or colleagues or other, teaching faculty who might want to use it, and then bring it to your department or your unit or your college and say, hey, we all want to use this. There's a great need. We want students to use this. Can we get a package deal? And I've definitely seen places go ahead and do that as long as there's a need for it and that people really will use it and really will enhance the learning experience. So subscriptions, you do have to watch out for those. Canva, Padlet, Socrative all have free versions, but it's limited in terms of what you can do. So for Canva, for example, it's limited in terms of different graphics and different animations are locked. If you don't have a subscription for Padlet, you only get like 3 boards to work with, and you have to keep kind of recycling them. And then Socrative, it comes down to classrooms and number of quizzes. And so, you just have a lot more free reign when it comes to the paid versions. So in a lot of cases, you might have a software or an app that has a download fee that might be like a one-time download. Like, for example, Human Anatomy Atlas 2023 is a great app to navigate the body and the brain and the organs and in different anatomy. It's a one-time download fee, and now when you pay that, then you have the app, and then that app is yours. But sometimes where they get you is in-app purchases. So they'll add on in-app purchases there, and what that does is you got that one-time fee of the app, but then now it's like, well, if you want this extra feature, you have to pay this. And the Anatomy app is an example of that, where it'll say, okay, you've paid for the app now that you have it, but if you want to watch these extra videos or if you want this extra feature, you have to pay per feature. And then finally, licenses. And many of you may be familiar, for example, SPSS is a great example of having to pay a yearly license. Some software is like a one-time deal. You get that license and then it doesn't expire, it's yours. But then in other cases, you have like one license for one computer, one user, so you can have user licenses or you can have different sort of packages depending on what kind of software you're talking about. And then here I don't really have on here other integrated systems, but there are definitely other ones that that are out there. For example, Launchpad. Launchpad is a great feature from a publisher that is an integrated system, Top Hat. Again, these are things that you do have to pay for, and you do have to think about, and you can actually build your course in Launchpad and in Top Hat. You can build your course in these, and these are separate from the learning management system that you get from your school. The problem is that you have to pay for them, right? So you might pay a particular fee, but then your students also might have to pay a subscription to these services. So thinking about the cost of the student. So a student might have to buy, more than one textbook. They might have to buy clickers, or they might have to buy subscriptions to, publisher software. They might, or platforms. They might have lab fees. And even just for one class, that's a lot. And imagine they're taking 4 or 5 classes. So that expense does add up very, very quickly. So some people do, to kind of overset the cost of something like, a subscription service to a publisher, or for just in general, like an app purchase. Some people use OER, which is basically open educational resources and free textbooks. And so they say, okay, well, I'm going to offset some of the costs of the class by doing an open resource book. There are some great options out there. And there's a lot of conversation around this in terms of different faculty. So definitely something to look into for textbook options. And it's really great for students because it's free for them. Now, other general information, and we've done this in class, thinking about, using like QR codes. If you are doing something where you want to link to something in the class, you can get a QR code if you actually Google QR code, Google formula, there's a Google spreadsheet where you can actually get and generate your own your own QR codes for any link that you have. There's also QR code generators that are online that you can just put the link in that you want to link that QR code to, and it'll generate a code for you. And then basically take a picture of that and then give it to your students, and then you can put it up on the screen in class. They can then use their camera, take it, and then get the link immediately. And then you can also see there's other apps like that you could use that actually generate their own QR codes. So Padlet is a really good example of this. So if you go in and make a Padlet board and you want your students to access it, you can then just click on the QR code and it'll give you the QR code for the Padlet board. And then you can share that with your class. Other things like forms, and we're going to not get into all the Google products, but Google has, amazing, wonderful products that can help you in a lot of different ways. Google Sheets, Google Slides, Google Docs, which is basically like, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And these right here, the Google Forms are really nice because then you can go ahead and have something that's really sort of aesthetically pleasing and easy to use and give it to students to fill out. And the great thing about forms like Qualtrics or Google Forms, Qualtrics obviously being an expensive survey software, but Google Form is free. The cool thing about both of those or either of those is that they'll automatically download that or move that data into a spreadsheet. So if you have a Google Form and you have students filling it out, you don't have to go in and actually type in the data. It'll automatically transfer for you, which is really helpful. Exit tickets are really nice to do. These are really helpful for assessments in terms of what students got from the lecture that day. So you could do like a short quiz just to see, how students are, integrating or remembering or learning the information from that day's lecture. You can also do memes. These are fun too, and just kind of see, how do you feel after lecture today? Do you feel like, you got it? Do you feel like you understand? And have them pick a picture. And so that's kind of fun. And you can do exit tickets through things like Socrative. You can do like any kind of polling software or app you can use for exit tickets. And then finally, word clouds. We've done this in class before, but basically it is, you can use like Poll Everywhere and other kinds of software or apps to do this. But this is really nice to kind of get a really good indication of what students are thinking. And obviously the more people who, type in a word, the bigger the word is. And I've done this with class before. And I've said, what's your favorite animal? And so it'll be like everybody put dog. And so dog is really big. And some people put cat. And some people put bird. And so you might have like, I don't know, a mouse right here really tiny because one person put it. But the bigger the word, the more people put that word. And it's just really fun. And it kind of breaks things up. Now, let's go into just a few of the different kinds of apps and softwares. I'm just going to kind of hit on a few of these. So the obvious ones, Microsoft PowerPoint, Keynote, Google Slides. Most people are familiar with those, but I just want to kind of bring out the ones that people might not be as familiar with. SlideEgg has a really nice set of templates, and these are free templates to use, and these are slide decks like PowerPoint that you can do. Mentimeter is really nice, but it does cost money to use. It is a really interesting sort of integrated package where I haven't used it very heavily. I've only kind of sort of played with it a bit, but it is a great, and I've had students tell me that they really like it. It's a really interesting, different kind of approach to presentations. explain everything. So this is what I like to call kind of the whole package when it comes to doing presentations, because you can record yourself and you can use a whiteboard. You can use and you can use a whiteboard, really in any presentation using whiteboard app, or just using a blank screen and annotating on it. But explain everything is just a really neat way to present your information and present your presentation. Canva is one of my favorites. And again, there's a free version, and then it also does cost money in terms of extra features. But this is just a really neat kind of app. And so they will get different artists to come in and do different designs for them. And what I really love is that many of their designs are very inclusive. This is an example of a slide deck that I did a couple years ago, that I did for a social psychology class, talking about current events and talking about COVID and masking and all that, and linking in some of the concepts we were learning, like cognitive dissonance, to why people do or do not wear masks. And so here you can see just really nice. These are all designs. This whole slide deck was a major design. I put in this picture and I put in this picture, but I used a graphic here from the app. And then here you can see just a really nice inclusive pictures and art from there. And so another thing that you can do with Canva is they have these options where you can basically put yourself right here as you are recording, and you can record in Canva. And so you can then record the whole thing and then get a video out of it. So, and this would pop up on each one, and you can kind of move it around. It's a really neat feature for Canva. So it has a lot of templates for different things. Another thing it's really nice for is infographics. And so here you can see this is I used a template, and then this was what I used for when the pandemic hit, how to basically be a better online student. And so I use their graphics. As you can see here, there's different graphics that and different sort of text font options. Just really nice, and really easy way to get something that I did not spend a lot of time on this right here at all. And I just used kind of a video game looking template, and I really, got that finished in a really short period of time. So it's really user friendly and intuitive. So this right here, these are examples of all the sort of presentation apps, and it's sort of more integrated stuff that you can use. If we want to talk about polling, attendance, quizzes, of course, Google Forms, and we've played with this in class. Nice, because it goes into spreadsheets. Some of you had mentioned that you've used Kahoot before. Kahoot is really fun. It's a really great app. And it is one of those really neat ones where you could do quizzes, and you can do sort of exit tickets with this. One complaint I have received from students is that it is a bit kind of kiddie. It's a little childish. Students have used it in grade school, and so even though it's familiar to them, it's kind of familiar in a bad way, because they kind of feel like it's a little too childlike, but it is a really neat kind of system to use, and students enjoy the process of it. They just they don't necessarily love the look of Kahoot. Now, Socrative is a good alternative because it's a more, I guess, mature looking version of Kahoot. And there's a teacher version, a teacher app that you would use to create your quizzes or your exit tickets or whatever it is that you're doing, or polling, and then you would launch it from your teacher app, whereas students have another app that they would download to access your classroom. There is, of course, a free version of this, but the paid version will give you more classrooms and more quizzes. And then Poll Everywhere, again, there's a free version and a paid version. The free version is limited in terms of how many people can access the polls and respond to the polls. So if you're teaching a really large class of 250 students and you're doing a word cloud, I did that one time, really cool word cloud with Poll Everywhere, but it only limited to 40 responses. So that wasn't very helpful. So you do need to kind of check in and make sure that your technology is compatible with what you're doing in terms of classes. Another thing that's interesting with Socrative is that the free version allows students to type in their name, but the paid version allows you to actually upload a class roster, which will then help you immensely in terms of using it for attendance, where students don't have to sit and add their name in. But this is nice because it does transfer it to a report, a spreadsheet that you can then use later. One of the next to final things I want to talk about is discussion boards. And so some of you had brought up Jamboards, which is a Google product. And, learning management systems, LMSs have these discussion boards built in. Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, all has these built in. But it's kind of neat to try something different that doesn't feel like a discussion board. And Jamboard is one of those examples. So you can draw, and it's a collaborative board. So you can kind of make it a little bit different. You can also do, if you're thinking of, I want to do a discussion board, but I don't want to do a traditional discussion board, I don't have it on here, but Flipgrid is a really neat way to do video discussions. So you would say, okay, post a video that's a minute long and then a minute reply. And then this is just a really neat way to do discussions that's a little bit less traditional than doing, I'm just going to type my response on this thread. Padlet is another example of a really neat software or app to use. And here you can see it's like you kind of pin your responses. You can have prompts up here, and then students can then put in their responses below. There's different formats, there's different board types and different backgrounds that you can use. And then there are, like, you could do a map, you could do timelines. There's really a lot of opportunities here. But again, this is one of those, there's a free version that gives you 3 boards to work with, but if you want anything beyond that, you do have to pay. But again, it's nice to kind of pull this out into thinking about, doing a discussion board that looks a little different, and it feels like, not quite like, oh, I'm just doing this regular response and reply deal. The last thing I want to talk about today is apps for communication and collaboration. One of my absolute favorite ones is Remind. So Remind is kind of limited in terms of use. It really is just for kind of sheer communication. Think of it like as sending a bunch of text to your students. Really nice if you have something urgent you need to tell them, or a reminder. Hence the name Remind. So I would actually use it in my class to send out kind of a message to everybody. It goes to their cell phone, but you don't, or email, depending on how they set it up, but you don't see their cell phone number, and they don't see you. You can actually get the app on your phone. They don't see your number. So it's nice kind of it's not anonymous because they know it comes from you, but they don't see your information and you don't see theirs. So it's sort of blinded in a way. But it's really nice because if you're like, oh, hey, you have a paper due tonight or you have a paper due tomorrow, you can send them the Remind message. Students really like this. Students also are very familiar with this because they've used this in school. So it's not necessarily they don't dislike it. It just feels familiar to them, and they're used to using stuff like that. Perusall is another really interesting example of communication and collaboration. And this is really helpful for journal clubs. So if you have a research lab and you do a journal club, Perusall is really nice because you can assign an article and then everybody can annotate on it. And this is a really neat way to communicate that way. So it's a little bit different. You might not find yourself using it necessarily for class, but it's a nice way to kind of integrate some information and share. But again, using these with trainees, with colleagues, with your lab students, these are all things that you can kind of think about. How would I use this in a class setting? Slack and Discord are very similar. So these right here, to me, these are really similar in terms of what they're capable of doing. These are really great for communication and collaborating, putting documents together, and making changes and communicating back and forth with changes. So I really like to use these for like collaborative groups. If you have people working together on a project or working together on a paper, for example, communicating back and forth with Discord or Slack, either one. These are, again, sort of very similar. And, using things like Teams, Google Classroom, Apple Classroom in the classroom is helpful for collaboration and communication as well. I didn't really go over those because most people are relatively familiar with, like, for example, Teams or Google Classroom, but these are a little bit different. So I'm looking forward to more discussion on this. This was just kind of a crash course into some of the apps and software that are more commonly used, and why and when and how expensive they are. So looking forward to conversation later.